Our next panel is quite exciting. We've got a very distinguished pedigree of investors joining us. We have Vani Kola, who has straddled both Silicon Valley and Bangalore. Prashanth Prakash, who was one of the early movers in terms of investing in the tech space. If I could invite them up on stage together with Sorusch Amiri, who will be moderating this panel. Please welcome them. Thank you.
Back to India about a decade ago. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you started? What was it like raising that first fund at a time when India wasn't necessarily booming?
No, in my case, I moved back in 2006 to India, having lived in US then for a little over 20 years. But sometimes the outside-in perspective is actually very valuable. Although I grew up in India, something happened in end of 2005 as I traveled through India. I just saw opportunity everywhere. And we thought, and of course I was very familiar with venture, having lived in Silicon Valley for many years, having been an entrepreneur myself. And I saw a huge opportunity in India to do venture and work with this young nascent ecosystem and young entrepreneurs who had just so much enthusiasm, passion to go create something. And I thought the whole world would look at it, whole world at that point being the world of LPs, would look at it the same way. And that didn't quite happen. Of course, we raised a fund and so forth. But really, I just saw India as a next big opportunity in 2006.
And what was it like raising that first fund? I mean, Prashanth, you have a quite unique story of how you got started.
Yeah, so we've been on the ground for more than 10, 12 years now. So, and I moved back to India slightly before Vani, almost 16, 17 years ago. And my first venture in India was actually a startup. So my startup was in India. It was one of the first internet companies in India. So I think my partner Subrata was also an entrepreneur in India, and as fortune or luck would have it, both our companies exited the same quarter. So both were jobless, and we had two options. One is we could do another startup, or we said, how could we make a larger impact, and our learnings, our journey that we have been to, how can we apply it to multiple companies? And that's how we came up with the idea of doing a small fund, a seed fund. And we're very fortunate that Google at the same time was looking at what's happening in India. And they wanted to have somebody who could give them kind of a sense for what's happening on the ground. And they said, we'll be your first LP. So that's how we started out. So we raised a 10 million fund with Google as our first LP.
And obviously since then India has, the Indian ecosystem has really accelerated and grown tremendously. Can you guys give us an idea of sort of what this scale is that we're looking at? And by the way, feel free to put some of the portfolio companies to tell us like a little bit more about some of the success stories that you guys have actually worked with and invested in.
I think scale is one aspect of it, but the whole mobile, you can't just ignore how the mobile adoption in India really changed things even in the last 5-6 years, right? So the momentum of adoption is what has dramatically changed. Just to put things in perspective, you heard Bhavesh in Pomola, right? So and they were somewhere in the middle of this whole journey. But Flipkart, for example, maybe took 4 years or 5 years to get to 10-20,000 transactions a day. Ola took 3 years to get to 10-20,000 transactions a day. And some of the new hyperlocal startups like Swiggy or Zomato, they got to 10-20,000 transactions a day within a year. So I think the momentum of how people are taking on to some of these services is dramatic. And Vani, maybe you can talk a little bit about Mintrends and to put in perspective how the scale of some of these are today.
We share a few investments that we have invested together. Both of our firms traditionally are Series A investors, sometimes Series B investors, but we are very early stage investors, right? So if I recall the story of Myntra, which we are collective investors in, or were collective investors in, and eventually it got sold to Flipkart. But the entrepreneur started with a vision of wanting to be a fashion portal when e-commerce was very, very nascent. There was hardly much of e-commerce, and at that point it would have been a really big leap to say that people want to first buy fashion online, because that doesn't feel natural or traditional process through which you are going to purchase. But conviction of the entrepreneur, and he also always was very fond of saying, I'm building a technology company. And in many ways I think the success depended on that in hindsight, because it's always easy to talk about why something succeeded or failed. But at that point, when a big chunk of money, huge portion of your, disproportionate portion of your money is going into technology, the benefit of which is not immediately obvious or apparent. And little things like, of course in India there was a consumer trust deficit in the context of, before e-commerce, believe it or not, you couldn't actually return anything that you bought for any number of reasons if you had to return. And there was a fundamental gap in the aspiration of the consumer from a service and access and what traditional retail was offering. Now that may be an India problem, and I know that it's very different in this region, but each local offers opportunities. And today, interestingly, not only Myntra is the largest online fashion portal, but they are the largest compared to any other brand, right? Largest in size as well. So they've kind of built a singular brand themselves and now are going offline. So it's just that these business models continue to pivot to provide very interesting opportunities with scale.
So obviously, as those examples of some of these tech companies have scaled, so has your capital base, right? So
Yes.
We heard a little bit about your humble beginnings. Now, as I said, you're managing more than $500 billion each across multiple funds.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about two things? One, what were some of the sort of most prevalent or biggest pushbacks that you guys got initially? And what was the profile of those investors? We heard about Google. And how's that profile of those investors changed? So how did you overcome some of those initial challenges? And how's the profile of the investor, I guess the limited partners, for people that aren't familiar with the term, limited partners are investors in venture capital funds or venture capital vehicles. How has that profile changed? How has that permanent capital become different?
See, for us, when we started, we called three big pushbacks from LPs. One, can India, there's many things unclear. How does money go in? How does money come out? And lots of gray areas, especially when regulation is still being defined. So that was one pushback, and either you're comfortable in that somewhat undefined zone or you're not as an LP, right? So that was one significant pushback, because we're all Mauritius funds investing into India, technicality, but it's material when you're doing this first time. Second was really around, is the entrepreneurial ecosystem mature in India, and there was no way to say yes or no. You have to, we had a conviction, and as an LP you had to take the punt and believe in that. And third was, really there wasn't an active GP group in India yet, right? So are you really going to stick with it and make it work in India? Because almost all of the GPs that have created funds are people like me or Prashanth, could live globally anywhere, but you have chosen to come back to India and do this. So are you really going to do this for the next 10, 20, X number of years? So I think those were material concerns. And hence, for us, the first set of LPs that came had to come with people who knew us. And since much of my adult life was spent in North America, so almost all our LPs were North America based, right? Fund of funds and so forth. Now, for the fund we raised last year, we have Asia LPs, we have from the overall Emirates region. ADIC is a big supporter, big LP for us, and and then endowments, and the mix has changed significantly to less fund of funds and more family offices, and also geographic, from 100% North America, today probably 50% North America and remaining 50% from other geographies.
What is
the only thing I'll add in terms of LP is the history. So I think every country has a lot of history, And there are two sets of investors. Investors who have kind of been bruised by that history and have a very different perspective of that country and feel that, hey, you know what, let me just stay away and sit out. I don't think the timing is right. And you have another set of investors who are just like Vani said, is looking for the ecosystem to mature. They have no past history. I think the first set of investors were a big challenge for India, because I think India went through a stage where there was a lot of private equity money that came into the country, went into areas like real estate and largely non-technology infrastructure.
So, we know that if someone is not ready, they are not ready. So there's not a lot you can do to get them comfortable about a region and a macro story. But what we have found is many of the funds that said we are not ready in 2006, some of them have stayed in very constant touch and said, now we are ready, we want an allocation in your fund. And somewhere that relationship building also matters, even if you're not ready today. Maybe 10 years down the road you're ready, but if you don't build the relationship with the managers, maybe at the point the managers become sought after, you won't get that allocation. So even if you're not ready today, I think building that relationship is perhaps worth doing.
Prashanth, you used the word that I'm going to use as a segue to our next question, which is VC entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear from the both of you. So both of you have been successful entrepreneurs and operators before you started becoming investors. And I'd love for the two of you to talk a little bit more, and if you can, with concrete examples of how important that experience was in being more than just capital when you're investing in entrepreneurs, especially at a time when the ecosystem was so nascent, where there was already a massive lack of know-how in general.
Yeah.
So how important was it to have an investor that is working with entrepreneurs that has done it before?
Yeah, so I think really it's the early stage VC entrepreneurs that build an ecosystem, right? In fact, in many cases, the angels and some of the other folks follow later, right? So you need some institutional, foundations, right? Even if they're small funds, 10, 20, $30 million funds, to really provide kind of a strong foundation for the ecosystem. And I think the fact that we were all entrepreneurs before helped us actually pick the right entrepreneurs, because we knew what really it would take. I mean, India and in any environment is very difficult, but we had a sense for how difficult India is. So we were able to really, not only pick the right entrepreneurs, but work with them and help them in extremely tough situations. I mean, there was just no capital availability, when we all started. So entrepreneurs had to, go through, years of fundraising without really getting to the right amount of capital, right? So I think, that really made a big difference, that we had the operating background. And in seed to early stage, it's extremely important. So as LPs, the highest, the holy grail of all venture is early stage and seed. It is the sweet spot, right? It is the hallowed ground. But it really takes a different kind of a venture partner to really have the patience to work with these companies and have that patience to really, slog it out with the entrepreneur. So I think that is something that you should evaluate because it's fashionable now to say that I'll do seed, I'll do early stage, but can they do it over 10 years, right? So doing seed investing or doing early stage is not an option, right? If you're going to be dedicated and committed to it, you've got to do it year after year, and that's something that's very important.
To me, I think I see two things as an advantage having been an entrepreneur. By the way, some of the best VCs globally have not been entrepreneurs, so I don't think it's necessary that you have been an entrepreneur to be a good VC. But at least for me, the advantage that I get out of it is, first, any company, any deal, any pitch, it's easy to say why it won't work, right? But you have to think about why it could work, and you are investing into the could part, right? And I remember one of our very early investments we made in 2008 was a company called Snapdeal, which is one of the largest e-commerce marketplaces in India today, valued at close to 6 billion. We invested at 6 million in 2008, right? And we were the first early stage investor putting 2 million into them. And I remember the first LP meet after we had invested, I had this entrepreneur present, and several of my LPs said, I don't see how this is going to work, right? And they're right, it's not that. There are always a million reasons why something won't work, but there are a few reasons why entrepreneurs see something and they make it work. And I feel that having lived that in that world, maybe there is a ability to sort of see through their eyes what is it that they're gazing ahead, right? So that's one. The second thing is, I think Asia, India, and India also specifically is a very relationship business. Contract, all that is fine, but it's a very relationship-based culture. And being that, I think entrepreneurs rightly so believe that when they take money from someone who has been there, of course everybody understands financial returns are very important, but they feel that will be more empathetic and more long-term in helping them grow and doing the right thing. So that doing the right thing as a core of the relationship is an advantage you get when they believe their pain and so forth.
Thank you. So to change gears a little bit, I'd love also for the two of you to talk a little bit more about our region here. So both of you have had the pleasure of hosting you for events before, and to come, and in your case, Prashanth, you've now made your first investment here actually. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your impressions are of the ecosystem here and how you compare it to India, specifically with the consumer
Prashanth
profile?
is going to give a real answer.
No,
I'm going to give you, a different answer.
Okay.
Okay. I don't actually know the region very well from investing perspective because I haven't looked at it like that, and I can't claim any. Actually, I come here for two reasons. Because PK feeds me really good food. Okay. All right. So he's always warm and makes it home. And because I love Danny, can't say no to Danny. So he says, you come, and these two men say, come, I come. So that's it. So.
Yeah, there's another joke, in India, a lot of VCs who just travel in, we call them, tourist VCs or whatever VCs. So don't take us seriously here.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that apart, I think, the reason, we are serious about this region and starting to look at it is, one is we see a lot of cross-border elements of how things are getting built, just the way things got built between the US and India, right? So there's a lot of expat, cross-pollination between these regions. So I saw a lot of that dynamics between India and the fact that there are a lot of Indians who have lived in both places, who have a lot of relationships. You can leverage the technology capability that India has, and also the learnings from there. And I think so that cross-border element was one important thing. And then, of course, the adoption of technology, that some of the trends and the signals that we saw for 4 years, 5 years ago in India, we started to see some of them here. Just the millennials starting to make meaningful purchases online, and we've been following suit for quite some time. So we've seen critical mass emerge from there, and Kareem and all this. So I think we just believe that the next 3-4 years are going to be significant in terms of how some of the disruptive companies and entrepreneurs can emerge from here. And the quality of entrepreneurs. I had made a couple visits here about 4 years, 5 years ago, and I see again a significant difference. And that's what changed a lot in India too, and really made all the difference. So I think it's a lot of things coming together. So I think it's a perfect start.
It's good to hear. So one last question, where I will unfortunately have to put both of you a little bit on the spot.
You haven't so far?
I thought I did. I guess I did. So there's obviously sort of the audience is full of also potential LPs, i.e. limited partners, people interested in investing in this asset class, getting involved. When you were raising across the multiple funds that you have now, what were some of the biggest mistakes that potential investors made when they thought about investing in your funds? I.e., what advice do you have for people that want to get involved in this asset class?
Look, first they have to get comfortable with the macro, okay? And that's coming to the region, spending time, building your own opinion on where is this going to be 10, 20 years. In a way, it's actually easier because to look ahead 10 to 20 years out is always easier than the next 1 to 2 years out, right? And do you believe in the macro of the country? And if you sit and, talk to a few people, you will form an opinion, whatever that opinion is, and you could get it right or you could get it wrong. And that's one aspect. And I think a lot of people didn't really see, it's not a negative of India, right? Of course, when you come, I think earlier P.K. said he won't come to Bangalore anymore because he hates the traffic, but I know he will come because there is opportunity there and traffic, somebody is driving you, but how much ever you hate the India traffic or whatever else you hate about it or love about it, the opportunity is real, right? So I think it's important to form the macro view, and that's one aspect. And you have to feel that the macro is ready and hence you are ready. Then the second part is who do you want to work with, right? We already touched on, you have to work with people, they are local, you're not going to be able to babysit them. So the relationship has to be the dominant factor to why you choose to work with the manager. So apart from getting the macro, when are you ready for this? The asset class likewise represents a certain opportunity and certain risk. So once you cross those two things, and this is nothing new what I'm saying, who do you want to work with, right? And it takes time. It takes time to build that view and relationship. And like I said, if you don't do it now, it's next year. If it's not next year, 5 years down the road. But India presents that opportunity today that it didn't a decade ago.
Can I ask you? You don't have to answer this question, but were there any LPs that said no to you in the beginning and then didn't get an allocation in the later fund?
Yes. Part of it is because, and it's not personal, it's not like that, right?
Yeah.
So part of it is because people have minimum check sizes, right? They want a minimum $30, $40 million allocation, without which it doesn't make sense to them to be in the fund. And what that means is, in a way, I have to think of you as an anchor. It's not about, could I cut out an allocation for you of $5 million somewhere, and if I like you enough, I probably can. But even if I could, you probably can't do such a small investment, and that's the problem for a lot of the LPs. So many times the challenge is, once funds have sufficient subscription, if you want to get allocation of a large check size, getting in becomes the problem. For example, we have only about under 15, somewhere between 12 to 15 LPs. That's all we have. When we add one more, and in each fund we at best are adding 1 or 2 new LPs, right? So it's not like we are adding a lot of new LPs.
So there's a lot of retention from the old funds.
Yeah, a lot of retention from the old funds. And within that, let's call it 15 people, we have only 4 people we have given allocation of greater than 25 million. And if you want that kind of an allocation, that is where the problem happens. So the no is many times because we just don't have room to give that kind of an allocation.
Yeah, that's happened for quite a few of our LPs. So I think my recommendation is start early in an ecosystem, start small, and you don't have to just pick one team. So you can pick a couple teams, right, and see how it works out, because at the end of the day, even when any of us started out, nobody knew who would be successful, right? So I think it's good to get comfortable with a couple teams, start out, and based on what works out, at least if you want allocation later, you have a seat on the table to get allocation.
But sometimes you can get that allocation. I'll share a quick story. I remember when I met the good folks at ADIC, they had just an hour before their flight and they were staying at Oberoi. They said, "Did you come and meet us?" And I went, and it was just a great first meeting. And they told me right then, if I promise you 40 million, can you promise me allocation now? We hadn't even seriously started fundraising, right? So I said, I really liked them, the way they approached it. I said, fine. So they were the only ones we gave that kind of an allocation in that fund. Part of it was they caught us just before we went to fundraise. And they showed us that they really want to work with us. And they've been great LPs for us to learn from and have in our family. So sometimes you can get that allocation depending on how you build that relationship with the GPs, even if you weren't there in their fund before. So timing also matters.
And also there's a regional kind of distribution that all funds look at, right? So for example, we would like to have big funds represented from different parts of the world, and that's another reason why you may actually get into some of the funds that otherwise you don't get in.
So I think we have just a little bit of time for a few questions, so I'm going to open it up if there are questions. Any questions? Please, Vani, go ahead.
In our world, I think the people who haven't yet taken the plunge and invested in venture capital typically think that there's less thought and strategy given to something quite simple as an investment strategy. Can you maybe just talk to us about how you formulate your investment strategies from a timing perspective, from a theme perspective, how you refine that, and what that looks like for the audience, please?
Yeah, I think a very good question, Danny, because I think there are two big things that differentiate early and seed stage investing from later investing. One is that you need to be ahead of the game. So there's a little bit of feedback. So you need to be ahead of the game. You really need to know what's coming down the pipe 3 years, 4 years down the road. And seed plays well into that because you can take a bunch of bets around a framework or a hypothesis that you have made, and different dimensions of the same hypothesis, and say that, hey, you know what, let me get multiple entrepreneurs who have different thought processes on the same kind of broad space, go at it, and we'll see what works out, right? And you reserve enough money for the winners that come out of that. So I think it's very, very important that you have a opinion at the seed stage, because you're not following somebody else's opinion. So as LPs, you need to diligence if the GPs that you're working with, do they have a view that is a couple years, 2-3 years forward looking, maybe right, maybe wrong, but you just can't follow.
This is definitely not, luck is always important, God's grace is always important in everything. But, it's not just crapshoot skill, let's put it that way, right? Then just go to Las Vegas or whatever. But I think one is really, do the GPs have a ability and a conviction to take risk? That's very important. For example, I'll tell you two things, one that worked, one that didn't. 2006, which was our first fund, has done very well for our LPs. I know Prashanth's fund also has done very well. These are probably about the only two funds that have done really well in making money for the LPs. And in our case, we built a very early but a very good e-commerce portfolio at a point that nobody was going to touch e-commerce. And it's not that we did it because nobody was touching. We had a very deep conviction about why it was going to work, right? And almost having that conviction is important than GPs who have no conviction at all. Now, we also invested early in mobile, which didn't work because 3G took, if you know what happened in India with 3G, that's a next whole hour of conversation we can have. But, it just didn't work, and everything that we did in 3G failed, right? Because we were too early to the market. But I'm glad at least we had the conviction to be able to go do it and try it, right? So it's GPs who are not willing to think ahead and have a very firm view. And when they are more herd mentality, as we say in our business, they invest because other people are investing. That's the worst possible way to invest, right? So that's one aspect. The second is, do they build access into entrepreneurs, right? And many entrepreneurs that we have invested in are people we started conversations much before. So it's not about competing for a deal and trying to outbid others. That does not work necessarily in our business. Of course, you have to be competitive, but can you get access into deals because you build that relationship with entrepreneurs. Those are some of the things that contribute to firm success in this business.
And I think the only other thing I'll add is, do they have a portfolio construction model in mind? Right? So it's very important that ultimately you've got to create exits. So you need to make sure that the capital that you allocate will help the winners. And for that, there are a few companies that may not take that much of capital, but will probably build out and give you early exits. So I think it's very important also to see how the GPs are thinking about the whole exit scenario within that ecosystem and how exits can really play out.
We have one more question.
I use this side. So my question was, one of the reasons that India was put on a global map is exporting innovation out of the country and sending it out globally and importing it. And MENA started to look into this as well. I mean, MENA traditionally so far has been importing innovation. So what do you think have been the factors or what has helped startups and entrepreneurs to export innovation out of the country and put yourself on the global map?
Yeah, I think India has been more a back office service provider largely.
Yeah.
Right, so I don't think we have till very recently been in that business of exporting innovation. It's only just like Vani said, there was a whole e-commerce boom in India, which was about innovating for the ecosystem within India, for the consumer within India. But in the last, I would say 3-4 years, some of the software, especially the SaaS companies, are starting to export SaaS models out of the country. Freshdesk, one of our companies, InMobi, and some of these companies. But I think these are still far and few in between. So if you see, it's really about how disruptive technology could be leveraged for domestic consumption is what the story is largely been around. And I think it's going to be very similar in this region too. I don't think it's about exporting innovation, it's about leveraging what is disruptive technologies that matter here. And actually, there's an important point, right? It's not always technology either. It's about tweaking small elements of a model where technology plays a role, right? And how that kind of disrupts the incumbents and how the ecosystem has looked at a particular space.
I think one of the huge advantages India has had is that it exported human capital. At the end of the day, anything is all about people. And that human capital that for various economic reasons, not for the intended outcomes that we have had, actually has played a very big role in the India development, because you now had a large group of people with very global exposure that could bring that fresh perspective back. And that tide has not slowed down, right? So starting from, you came back in 2000?
No, 2000.
2000, I came back in 2006, and and so on and so forth. I left India in 1985, and I don't think at that point I could have predicted at all that I would be coming back. But the economic growth has continued to further fuel with that. And today, I'm sure this is, others have the same experience, the number of resumes we get from kids graduating from whatever, Columbia, Harvard, MIT, wanting to come back to India and work is just, unprecedented. And that human capital wanting to today come back and work in India is actually the biggest thing that has been the tide turner.
Yeah, and which I think I'm starting to see in this region too, right? So that's really what can make a big difference.
I think we have time. One last question. Danny?
If no other question, I'm going to steal it. So, you were kind enough to invite me to K-Start, your accelerator, earlier in the year, and you had the wonderful Ratan Tata up on stage. And in your hour dialogue, what I discovered, and I'm going to compress it 1 hour and 30 seconds, this is a man who is much older than me. I think he's in his 70s, late 70s, and has been very intellectually curious about technology and this concept of disruption, and has been in the trenches learning and investing. Started paying to learn, small tickets, and those tickets have adoption, and has been in the trenches learning and investing. Started paying to learn, small tickets, and those tickets have obviously grown. We love that story because we tell our local investors, where is our Ratan Tata? Because he's somebody who is well respected and people look up to him and they will emulate his activities. So in the absence of having yet found our Ratan Tata, can you just tell us about the journey? Because I know that you were quite instrumental in working with him in the early years and getting him excited about what we're all up to.
Well, I mean, most of you know his name, and I grew up, looking up to this as a brand, like all of us did. When you have so few things to hang on to, I think most Indians looked up to this whole brand and business house with a lot of pride, like you own them, and so when I had a first chance to meet with him, actually I was very, very nervous. I went 2 hours before to his office so I wouldn't be late. And but very signature to him. Very curious. I left the meeting very embarrassed because he told me he learned so much from me, and I was right. So, but the key was curiosity and wanting to see where the future is going. And in many ways, the joy I find about my job is, sure, it pays and all of that, but it's that every day there is the satisfaction of an intellectual curiosity, and that gives me my thrills, right? And if you enjoy the process of mentoring, and you enjoy the process of having that intellectual engagement, I think this is just an absolutely best job you can have. And you can do that as an angel, you can do that through a institutional fund, and you can do that through whatever instrument that satisfies your need. But I think in his case, to him, that direct contact with entrepreneurs, hearing from them their aspirations, their dreams, and how they paint the future and the change agents that they want to be. There's something fresh about that, and I think we need all of us to renew ourselves by connecting into that energy. And I already said the people I know here, I think of them as my brothers, but I'm sure, so I don't know the region very well from its depth other than the few people that I love and cherish that I know here. But I'm sure there are, this is a beautiful city, fantastic in what it has done as an economic capital that any other city in the world would love to emulate. But give back a little to young people, and the money is irrelevant, it's a small amount of money. And, but give back to the young people and seeing their dreams come live and the impact that it can then have. I think there's a very, very deep satisfaction in that. So you haven't done a good job of bringing them forward to do
We're
it.
still searching for our Ratan Tata. We'll find him.
No,
He could be in this room, or she could be in this room.
Yeah.
But I think, Danny, the good thing that you've been doing is getting role models on the
Yeah.
stage here and role models to this region. And I think that's the other, like I said.
And also this forum.
Yes, exactly. I mean, so there are a lot of things that kind of created that critical mass in India. So when you have those first 2-3 role models, and you'll be able to not only bring role models from your region but from India here. So I think that's going to be extremely helpful in people to actually believe in this story. Yeah.
I guess looking for Ratan, we're looking for the person that sets the precedent from an investment perspective. In this country, and particularly in Dubai, we look up tremendously to Sheikh Mohammed, and he drives a white G-Wagon, and everybody wants to drive a white G-Wagon. You can't find them because he drives one. So the same concept there as Ratan Tata investing in the tech ecosystem early on. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for hosting this, by the way. I
Thank
saw
you.
this last year,
Yeah.
and it has grown bigger and better and great.
Thanks, really nice to be here.
Thank you very much. It's an annual event, so stick on the calendar. We'll move away from Thanksgiving next year.